If you're going to make a protocol hockey player, who would you pick? You'd pick Gordie Howe.
Well, you can see why Gordie Howe is said to be the greatest player in the history of the National Hockey League.
But the best all-around player that can play any position and probably go to goal is Gordie Howe.
For decades, hockey fans have argued about the greatest player who ever lived. Some point to Wayne Gretzky and the records that may never be broken. Others remember the brilliance of Mario Lemieux, the dominance of Bobby Orr, or the leadership of Marc Messier. Every generation has its heroes, and every generation believes it witnessed something special. Yet whenever the conversation turns to the player who truly represented hockey itself, the debate often becomes surprisingly short. The answer is Gordie Howe. What makes that so remarkable is that Gordie Howe retired long before many of today's fans were born. The game has changed dramatically since his era. Teams have expanded. Equipment has evolved. Training methods have become more advanced. Players are faster, stronger, and better protected than ever before. Hockey has produced countless superstars since Howe first stepped onto NHL ice. And yet, no matter how much the sport changes, one question continues to linger in the minds of old hockey fans. Why was there never another Gordie Howe? It wasn't because nobody was talented enough. Hockey has seen extraordinary talents. It wasn't because nobody could score enough goals. Several players built legendary careers after Howe, and it certainly wasn't because the league stopped producing stars. In every decade, new names emerged and captured the imagination of fans across North America. But somehow, despite all that greatness, nobody ever became the next Mr. Hockey. Perhaps the reason is simple. Gordie Howe was never just a hockey player. He was toughness when hockey was brutal. He was consistency when careers were short. He was excellence when every game felt like a battle for survival. More than anything, he became the standard by which every player who followed would be measured. And tonight we're looking at the 5 reasons why, even after all these years, nobody has ever truly replaced Gordie Howe. Gordie Howe was born on March 31st, 1928, in the small farming community of Floral, Saskatchewan. There was nothing glamorous about his childhood. Like countless Canadian families during that era, the Howes worked hard simply to get by. Life revolved around family work and long winters. Hockey was not a pathway to fame. It was part of everyday life. Yet even as a young boy, Gordie possessed something that would separate him from almost everyone around him. He had a relentless determination that never seemed to disappear no matter how difficult the challenge became. When Howe entered professional hockey, the NHL was a very different world. There were only 6 teams. Roster spots were precious. Every veteran was fighting to keep his place. Young players were expected to prove themselves immediately or risk being forgotten. Nothing was handed to anyone. If a player wanted respect, he had to earn it shift after shift, season after season. Gordie Howe embraced that reality better than anyone. He wasn't the loudest player. He wasn't interested in creating headlines. He simply showed up every night and played a style of hockey that opponents quickly learned to fear. As the years passed, something extraordinary began to happen. Howe wasn't merely becoming one of the league's best players. He was becoming the player everyone else measured themselves against. He could score with the league's elite snipers. He could outwork the hardest workers. He could withstand physical punishment that would sideline most players. On many nights, he looked less like a hockey player and more like a force of nature, impossible to intimidate and nearly impossible to stop. Fans admired him because he represented everything they loved about the game. Opponents respected him because they knew exactly how difficult it was to do what he did year after year. What truly separated Gordie Howe from most legends, however, was that his greatness refused to fade. Generations of stars entered the league, built Hall of Fame careers, and retired, while Howe remained connected to the sport. He played against legends from one era and lived long enough to inspire legends from another. By the time people began calling him Mr. Hockey, the nickname no longer felt like an exaggeration. It felt like a statement of fact. Gordie Howe had become more than a superstar. He had become the living symbol of hockey itself. And the first reason nobody has ever replaced him begins with something that even many Hall of Famers never achieve. Gordie Howe didn't excel at one part of hockey. He mastered all of it. Number 5. He dominated every part of the game. When fans talk about all-time great players, they usually start by describing what made them special. Wayne Gretzky is remembered for vision and playmaking. Bobby Orr revolutionized the offensive role of a defenseman. Mario Lemieux combined size and skill in ways few players ever could. Every legend has a defining trait that immediately comes to mind. Gordie Howe was different because no single description ever seemed large enough. The more people watched him, the harder it became to place him into one category. He could score like an elite sniper, pass like a playmaker, battle like an enforcer, and lead like a captain. Most players spend their careers trying to become exceptional in one area. Howe somehow became exceptional in nearly all of them. That versatility made him a nightmare for opponents. If a defenseman focused too heavily on preventing his shot, Howe would create opportunities for teammates. If opponents attempted to slow him down physically, they often discovered he was stronger than expected. If a game became rough, Howe never seemed uncomfortable. He welcomed that challenge. There were many great scorers in NHL history and many tough players, but very few managed to become both at the same time. Howe's reputation grew because he could beat opponents in whatever style of game happened to develop that night. Some evenings he dominated with skill. Other nights he dominated through determination and physical play. Either way, the result often felt the same. Perhaps that is why the phrase Gordie Howe hat trick became part of hockey culture. A goal, an assist, and a fight in the same game perfectly captured the public image of Mr. Hockey. Whether or not he accomplished it frequently was almost beside the point. The phrase survived because it reflected how fans saw him. Complete, tough, unpredictable, capable of influencing every aspect of the game. Modern hockey has produced remarkable athletes, but specialization has become increasingly common. Players are often known for one elite skill. Gordie Howe represented something older and rarer. He represented the complete hockey player. And while that alone would have made him unforgettable, the next reason nobody replaced him may be even more impressive. He achieved all of this during what many old-time players still consider the toughest era hockey has ever known. Number 4. He survived the toughest era in hockey. To truly understand Gordie Howe, you have to understand the world he played in. Many younger fans see old photographs and notice the black and white images, the smaller arenas, or the lack of modern equipment. What they often don't realize is just how unforgiving that era really was. Hockey during the original 6 years was not simply a sport. It was a nightly test of endurance. There were no helmets for most players. Protective gear was primitive compared to today's standards. Medical treatment was limited. Long road trips were exhausting. And because there were only 6 teams in the entire league, the same players faced each other over and over again, creating rivalries that became deeply personal. Nobody could hide. Nobody could escape a reputation. If you embarrassed someone on Saturday night, you might have to answer for it the following week. This environment produced some of the toughest athletes professional sports has ever seen, and even among those men, Gordie Howe stood apart. Opponents slashed him, hit him, grabbed him, and challenged him every chance they got because they knew stopping Howe was often the difference between winning and losing. Yet year after year, he continued to perform at an elite level. What makes that achievement remarkable is not simply the punishment he absorbed, but the consistency with which he kept returning. Many great players had brilliant seasons. Many tough players survived difficult careers. Howe somehow combined both. He was not merely surviving one of hockey's harshest eras. He was dominating it. One of the defining moments of his career came during the 1950 Stanley Cup playoffs, when a devastating collision sent him crashing violently into the boards. The injuries were so serious that there were fears he might never play again. For many athletes, an incident like that would have marked the beginning of the end. Instead, it became another chapter in the legend. Howe recovered, returned, and continued building a career that would stretch across decades. Stories like that only strengthened his reputation. Fans saw a man who refused to surrender. Teammates saw a player willing to endure almost anything for the game. Opponents saw someone who could not be intimidated. That toughness resonated with generations of hockey fans because it represented something larger than statistics. People admired goals and championships, but they respected resilience. They respected the willingness to get back up after being knocked down. Gordie Howe embodied that spirit better than almost anyone who ever played the sport. Even today, when former players discuss the hardest era in hockey history, his name inevitably appears because he was one of the few who not only survived it, but thrived within it. The league eventually became faster, safer, and more modern, but the image of Howe battling through one brutal season after another remained etched into hockey history. And perhaps the most incredible part of all is that the punishment, the injuries, and the physical demands never seemed to force him away from the game. Most players eventually lose their battle against time. Gordie Howe appeared determined to fight that battle longer than anyone thought possible. That is why the next reason nobody could replace him has nothing to do with goals championships or toughness. It has to do with longevity. Because while legends usually shine for a few years, Gordie Howe somehow remained part of hockey for what felt like an entire lifetime. Number 3. He played longer than anyone thought possible. If Gordie Howe's toughness helped build his legend, his longevity transformed that legend into something almost mythical. Every athlete eventually reaches a point where age begins to win. The body slows down, recovery takes longer, and the game becomes harder to play at the highest level. Hockey is especially unforgiving in that regard. The sport demands speed, balance, strength, endurance, and the willingness to absorb punishment on a nightly basis. Most careers end long before a player reaches 40 years old. Even the greatest stars eventually discover that talent alone cannot stop time. Gordie Howe seemed determined to prove otherwise. By the time many of his contemporaries had retired, Howe was still skating. By the time younger stars began taking over the NHL, he was still competing. Fans who had watched him dominate in one decade found themselves watching him again in the next. It became one of the most remarkable stories in professional sports because nobody expected it to continue for so long. Each season felt as though it might be the last, yet somehow another season would arrive and Gordie Howe would still be there. What made this achievement so extraordinary was that he wasn't hanging around as a ceremonial figure. He wasn't simply collecting paychecks or occupying a roster spot because of his reputation. He remained productive, he remained respected. Opponents still had to account for him. Younger players still wanted to measure themselves against him. The longer his career continued, the more impossible it seemed. Then came one of the most emotional chapters in hockey history. Howe joined the World Hockey Association and played alongside his sons Mark and Marty. For many fans, it felt almost unreal. The same player who had battled legends of the original Six era was now sharing professional ice with a new generation, including members of his own family. Fathers and sons could sit together in the stands and see something neither believed possible. Gordie Howe was no longer just a player from the past. He was still part of the present. That longevity gave Howe something few athletes ever receive. He wasn't remembered by only one generation of fans. Grandparents remembered him. Parents remembered him. Their children knew his name too. His career stretched across so many years that he became woven into the history of the sport itself. While other stars belonged to a particular era, Howe seemed to belong to all of them. The numbers alone are astonishing, but the emotional impact may be even greater. Fans watched entire chapters of their lives pass while Gordie Howe remained connected to hockey. He became a constant in a sport that was always changing. New teams arrived, new stars emerged. Rules evolved, styles of play changed. Through it all, the image of Gordie Howe endured. That kind of longevity is nearly impossible to replicate, but it still wasn't the most unique thing about him. Plenty of athletes have enjoyed long careers. Very few have managed to earn admiration from every generation they touched. Gordie Howe did exactly that, and it became one of the biggest reasons nobody could ever truly take his place. Number 2, he earned respect from every generation. Most legends are remembered by the people who watch them play. Their greatness becomes part of a particular era, a cherished memory for fans who were fortunate enough to witness it firsthand. As time passes, new generations arrive, new stars emerge, and the sport gradually moves forward. Gordie Howe somehow escaped that pattern. Instead of belonging to one generation, he earned the respect of nearly all of them. When Howe first became a star, he shared the ice with some of the toughest and most respected players hockey had ever seen. These were men who had survived the hardships of an earlier era and valued toughness above reputation. Respect was not freely given. It had to be earned. Howe earned it. Opponents who battled him night after night came away understanding just how complete a player he was. Teammates trusted him because they knew he would never ask anyone to do something he was unwilling to do himself. As the years passed and new stars entered the league, the admiration only grew. Players who had grown up hearing stories about Gordie Howe suddenly found themselves competing against him. Imagine being a young player entering the NHL and realizing that one of your childhood heroes was still on the ice. For many, it felt like stepping into hockey history. Yet what impressed them most was not his reputation. It was the fact that he still deserved it. Then came another generation. Bobby Orr transformed the defenseman position. Bobby Hull electrified fans with his scoring power. New superstars became the faces of the sport. Yet none of them spoke about Gordie Howe as if he were merely an old legend from the past. They spoke about him with genuine admiration. They understood the difficulty of what he had accomplished and the sacrifices required to maintain excellence for so long. Perhaps the most remarkable example arrived when Wayne Gretzky entered the NHL. By then, Howe's place in hockey history was already secure. Gretzky would go on to become the most productive scorer the sport had ever seen and break records that once seemed untouchable. Yet even Gretzky openly acknowledged the significance of Gordie Howe. Whenever discussions arose about the greatest figures in hockey history, Gretzky consistently treated Howe with a level of reverence that revealed just how much he meant to the sport. That universal respect is incredibly rare. Usually generations debate each other. Older fans defend the stars of the past, while younger fans celebrate the heroes of the present. Gordie Howe somehow united both groups. Older fans admired what he represented. Younger fans respected what he accomplished. Fellow players appreciated how difficult his journey had been. Even people who never saw him play understood that his name carried a special weight within the hockey world. Over time, this respect became something larger than admiration for a great athlete. Gordie Howe evolved into a symbol of hockey's values: hard work, durability, humility, competitiveness, loyalty to the game. Those qualities resonated regardless of era, which is why every generation seemed to claim a piece of him as their own. And that brings us to the final reason nobody could replace Gordie Howe. Because eventually his influence grew beyond goals, beyond championships, and even beyond the players who followed him. Gordie Howe stopped being just a hockey player. He became hockey itself. Number one, he became bigger than the sport itself. Every major sport eventually produces a handful of athletes whose influence extends beyond the game they played. They become symbols. They represent an idea, an era, or a set of values that fans associate with the sport itself. Baseball had Babe Ruth, boxing had Muhammad Ali, basketball had Michael Jordan, hockey had Gordie Howe. The difference is that Gordie Howe's connection to hockey became so complete that people eventually stopped describing him as one of the sport's greatest players and started describing him as the sport itself. The nickname Mr. Hockey explains everything. Think about how extraordinary that title really is. Hockey has existed for well over a century. Thousands of professional players have competed at the highest level. Hundreds have reached the Hall of Fame, yet only one man became known throughout North America as Mr. Hockey. That nickname wasn't created by executives, advertisers, or television networks. It emerged naturally because fans, players, coaches, and journalists all arrived at the same conclusion. If someone wanted to understand what hockey looked like at its best, they could look at Gordie Howe. Part of that reputation came from his accomplishments. He scored goals, he won championships, he collected awards, but plenty of players have done those things. What separated Howe was the way he embodied every quality hockey fans admired. He was talented without being arrogant. He was tough without seeking attention. He was competitive without losing respect for the people he played against. He carried himself with a quiet confidence that reflected the values many fans believed hockey should represent. As the decades passed, his legend only grew stronger. New generations of stars arrived, but none seemed capable of replacing the image that Howe had created. Bobby Orr changed the game. Wayne Gretzky shattered records. Mario Lemieux inspired awe. Yet even those legendary figures often spoke about Gordie Howe with deep admiration. They understood that they were building upon a foundation he helped create. Hockey's greatest players viewed Howe not merely as a former star, but as one of the sport's defining figures. What made his influence even more powerful was its longevity. Fans did not forget him after retirement. Broadcasters continued mentioning him. Former players continued telling stories about him. Young prospects continued learning about him. His name remained part of hockey's everyday language. A player who competed in the original Six era somehow remained relevant generations later. That is incredibly difficult to achieve in any sport. Perhaps that is why the NHL has never truly found another Gordie Howe. The league has produced incredible talents, unforgettable champions, and larger-than-life personalities. But replacing Gordie Howe would require more than finding another great player. It would require finding someone who could represent everything hockey means to millions of fans. It would require finding someone who could unite generations, earn universal respect, survive every challenge, and remain connected to the game long after the final whistle. That player has never arrived. And that is why decades after he first stepped onto NHL ice, Gordie Howe remains unique. Not because he was the only great player, not because he was the only champion, but because he became something much larger than either of those things. He became the face of hockey itself. The NHL has been blessed with extraordinary players throughout its history. Every era has introduced new stars, new champions, and new legends who captured the imagination of fans. Some scored more goals than anyone thought possible. Others changed the way the game was played. Some became global icons whose names reached far beyond the hockey world. Yet when the conversation turns to the player who truly defined the sport, the answer continues to point back toward one man: Gordie Howe. The reasons are impossible to ignore. He dominated every part of the game when most players specialized in only one. He survived hockey's toughest era and emerged stronger because of it. He played longer than anyone believed possible, extending his career across generations. He earned the respect of teammates, opponents, fans, and future legends alike. And ultimately, he became something no statistic can fully explain. He became a symbol of hockey itself. That is why nobody ever replaced him. The challenge was never about matching his numbers. It was about matching everything else: his toughness, his consistency, his humility, his longevity, his ability to represent the best qualities of the sport for decade after decade. Hockey has produced many legends since Gordie Howe retired, and it will undoubtedly produce more in the future. But some figures are simply too unique to duplicate. Perhaps that is the real meaning behind the title, Mr. Hockey. It wasn't just a nickname. It was recognition that Gordie Howe occupied a place in the sport that belonged to him alone. And after all these years, that place remains empty. Do you believe there will ever be another player who means as much to hockey as Gordie Howe did? Or will Mr. Hockey always stand alone?